Hello again, folks. So I recently brought and attended and completed the 8-hour webinar by Bernard Gumpfer on the occult hostile forces, and it's a very interesting webinar. Goes into detail about how these forces manifest in our daily lives and gives some very useful information on how to protect yourself, fight against, and integrate your life around these forces and be able to overcome them. And it's a very good webinar, and especially if you are new to this subject, you're just getting your feet into the water, into what is a very deep subject. Even in 8 hours, it was just a very quick overview, and Bernard just quickly touched on a huge variety of subjects. But it was very interesting. But if you are seasoned to this stuff, it probably won't be much new information to you. So yeah, but a big part of it is how to deal with them in your everyday life. And I believe it's very important to not get caught into the fear and the paranoia mindset when dealing with these forces, as that ultimately is exactly what they feed upon. These lower frequencies. But it's important to remember and come to terms with how these dark entities serve a teaching function. They are the teachers or the weights for the spiritual alive to then train themselves upon. And ultimately they can expose us to our own weak spots and blind spots that we have in our being. They highlight the areas we need to work upon, as they can only attach themselves to us if there is a resonance within us to attract them. So if you clear the old trauma and wounds within yourself, then it's a frequency thing. Your frequencies will no longer match, and you will the attacks will disappear, at least in that respect, in that area. And once you've done heaps of your own clearing, and you're well on the way. After you've really got solid and stuck into the esoteric side of life, then the attacks will start to come from other people. You will be so grounded and embodied that it will be harder and harder for them to work through you, and you'll actually have less resonance with them. So in turn, you create the snowball effect, and you then are then targeted from the outside. That's where it gets interesting again, as people around you can momentarily be influenced by these forces who are relentlessly trying to keep people within a certain parameter of reality, a certain frequency, which they then feed upon. And it's a lower frequency, mainly of fear and all of that sort of stuff, and guilt and shame. And so it's very important for people to become aware of themselves, so that we can transcend these lower frequencies and in essence transcend the matrix itself, as that's what we are here to do. We are here to become one with the divine again. That is the journey, and it's an awesome journey to be undertaking. So with the bigger picture of it all, and the understanding, we are better in a position to tackle these entities. And some very basic things that were covered in the webinar, stuff like how sunlight and being grounded is very useful against protection against entities. Nature is one of our most powerful allies in this battle. And how just being healthy in general lowers the resonance you have with lower negative entities. If you're sick or unhealthy in your lifestyle, you're very disconnected from nature, then you are more vulnerable to these forces. And that's all very basic stuff, but it's worth noting from the occult perspective how simple things like this can be very useful. And there was a couple of little tricks that I liked. I liked the idea of having saltwater scrubs. That goes a lot with the old superstitions and old folklores about how salt can be effective against the spirits, the evil spirits. And I noticed sometimes I go out into town, or if I'm spending time around a certain person who they just have a bit of a weird energy about them. They're not necessarily bad, but they're just something's a bit off. I feel like I've picked up a little bit of something, just like a little bit of gunk, or I don't know what it is exactly. It would be nice to be able to see it actually, so you could identify these different entities and energies that you can pick up of other people, and perhaps you'd be better equipped to not pick them up in the first place. But that's far down the line, if it even is possible at this current state of human affairs. But the saltwater scrubs really does help sort of shake things off. Shower, of course, is a very good time to cleanse and relax. But the saltwater scrub just takes it up a little notch, especially if needed. I really like that, and how crystals can be quite useful in just amplifying the energies of a room, although they're not the be all and end all. And it's not like you get a crystal and you're instantly enlightened, you have lots of money and everything's all good in your life. It's way more complex than that, but they're just like tools to help augment the process. Just little things like this. But the real bread and butter of it all is a strong meditation practice and a strong embodiment practice, such as yoga or qigong or something like, or dancing or something like that, where you really get into your body, and to be done consistently. So those two things are hugely important when combating these forces. And you can have all the crystals in the world and rub all the salt in your body in the world, but unless you have these two things, it's not going to be of much use. They are really, really important. I personally meditate every day, and I highly recommend it to everyone. And especially if you are delving into the occult or the esoteric side of life, I'd highly, highly recommend a strong meditation practice and an embodiment practice. And it's also important to note that there are some meditation techniques that actually sort of lower your consciousness and hypnotize you. They're no good. You want to aim for something that focuses your consciousness. It doesn't necessarily have to be to relax, but more to focus your mind, to focus consciousness on a single thing. And this in turn is so useful in life and interacting with people. You sort of slowly build this conscious observer that can help you in every aspect of life. So that's very, very important. And then you when you get good enough at this, you begin to observe your thoughts, and you can instantly catch when a negative thought comes into your mind. And I'm still at the intellectual level at this stage. I believe, and what I've researched and heard, it's possible, once you're embodied enough, to be able to feel when a negative thought or feeling is coming from the outside, like an external pressure or sensation is coming from maybe a negative entity, for example, or when you look into the technological side of things and how people can be manipulated through thoughts via technology as well, you'd be able to feel this. But still, for me, I'm just getting into the intellectual side of things. So when a thought comes up, I'm still intellectualizing whether or not it could have come from me, or could have come from a dark entity trying to manipulate me, or whatever. And most of the time, I believe it is this dark entity, the entity attachments. As in general, I don't believe most of my subconscious talking is that negative. It's but who knows? I can't say that's for certain, but that's just my guess. But at least I'm at the stage where I can identify the very second it comes in, and do my best to not identify with the feelings and sensations that thought may trigger. Admittedly, it's not always the case. Sometimes I'm just aware of it that happens, but I still get carried away in the sensationalism, and it's a very long journey, I believe, to get to a state where you can just be fully aware, observe, and something comes in, and it doesn't. You don't react, you just respond. We're looking at a high level of esoteric development to get to that stage, but definitely possible. And so it's very interesting when you can get to that sort of level of consciousness and how it can benefit you in your life. You think of how many people that they're depressed, or they're riddled with guilt and shame, when actually it's not even their own thoughts, it's not their own mind, it's this external entity, and that is latched onto some trauma that may have happened in childhood, or from a later time, and the trauma is just sort of sat there as this energetic dark hole. And then so imagine the implications if we were to understand this. It's very interesting. And if people don't step into their own power and truly think and create for themselves, then something or someone else will. It's like nature wants energy to be used and to flow. It wants so if there's stagnant energy that's not doing anything, or this this empty hole, then it's got to be filled. Something has to fill it or use it. So step into your own power, folks, and think and create for yourself. So that's two very important parts of it: the embodiment and the meditation practice. And I just recently discovered, although I heard it, I never experienced it, how yoga and sort of general stretching is very useful before meditation. And then apparently yoga was originally created just to relax the body before meditating, apparently. But I just recently discovered how it's hugely beneficial in focusing the mind. I've been meditating for a long time now, but I just recently done a half-hour stretching session before meditating, and it was almost like I had 2 times the amount of concentration, which is a lot. So that's a huge increase. I was very, very impressed with that. So I would highly recommend people to do that. And now, the next time I ever teach someone meditation, I'm going to highly recommend doing this. And so it's a good personal discovery for me to come across this. So a couple of beneficial things that I've got from taking out of this webinar, but also there is the whole idea of veganism, which has become quite a fad, in recent times. And I've always been a little bit dubious, but I thought, hey, sure, do whatever you like. It doesn't really work for me. I tried being a vegetarian, it just didn't work. I didn't have the energy, but I've had some attacks from some militant vegans before who think everyone should be exactly the same and eat the same, and it becomes a bit like a religion, So that's why I call it veganism. And I actually have a song entitled "Veganism" on my upcoming album. Going hard onto veganism. I'm quite interested to see how the responses I get from that. I can imagine anyone who is a vegetarian or a vegan, especially, is going to get hugely triggered from that. And that's why I kind of like being, the rap. You can sort of take it in that sort of angle, and you can be a little bit aggressive, but that's sort of the beauty of rap, Whereas in a casual conversation, you'd have to, just by being a normal, respectful human, you have to be a little bit more light with how you tell things. But that's why I really like the rap, because you can just let go. And so being grounded and embodied is huge in dealing with occult forces. And meat is very grounding for the body. It is a lower vibration and it's slow to digest, but that brings you down into your body. And if you are embodied and have a very high personal vibration, then a little bit of meat is not going to affect you at all, really. In fact, it can help ground you, so you can then embody more of the divine energies. It's actually what a lot of New Age spiritual teachings have put across, is that you have to be a raw vegan to be this high vibe sort of person, and it's absolutely completely false. I can attest from my own experiences and from others and from esoteric literature that there is no need to be a raw vegan to achieve the higher states of consciousness and levels of being. A strong meditation and embodiment practice is far, far superior to being a raw vegan. And in fact, from what this Butch Bernard suggests, is it can actually be dangerous to be sort of all lofty and ungrounded in your body, and to have your energy all sort of really, really high, because then people become really sensitive. And I've noticed myself, actually, I become a little bit more sensitive to things, and there's like a balance, it's good to be sensitive to the energies around you and people and what they put out and what stuff in your body does to you. But then you can get too far, and you become like this like hypersensitive being who just can't be in the presence of anything. Everything affects you too much, and you just become neurotic, and it's dangerous to go that route. I thankfully I managed to stop myself when I got too far, but I did go pretty far down that road. So yeah, I think it's good to have some meat to ground you and to bring you down into your body. So that made a lot of sense to me, and it was very interesting to hear that perspective from the occult side of things. And there was a slide talking about how apparently vegetarianism was created in India to keep the peasants fit enough to work, but not enough that they would have the energy at the end of the day to be able to, want to try and break free or overthrow their rulers. And I can't say how true that is. I haven't looked into it, but that's very interesting, and that's something to consider. So yeah, there's a few brief summaries of some of the points that I found very interesting in Bernard's webinar. Things just like dancing and getting into your body and singing and nature, salt water, all these sort of things can be hugely beneficial when dealing with these occult entities. And so that is a brief summary of a huge topic, and I would highly advise anyone interested to delve deeper into all of this. You can check out some of the links on my website. I have some articles about this, or check out Bernard's website, Tom Montauk's website. I'll put a link in the description below. And if you feel you have a spare 8 hours of your life and about $200 American, then you could possibly consider doing Bernard's webinar. For now, take care, folks, and see you next time.